Well, what?
That's as loud as you could crack it. Thunder's just a noisy racket.
That's the sleepy sign.
Welcome to another episode of the Radical Parenting Podcast. My name is Tony Shawcross.
Hey, everybody. I'm Kara Porva.
So most weeks, Kara and I read a parenting book that we think reflects the values of radical parenting, prime directive parenting, really honoring our children and being their partners and guides as they grow. This week is the same. We read a book this week. I'll show it on my screen, called The Yes Brain by Daniel Siegel and Payne Bryson. And I have to say that this is Karen and I haven't really talked about it yet, but this is my favorite book we've read. I mean, I've loved every book we've read. I'd say probably the Janet Lansbury one would be my favorite up until now, 10 episodes later, actually, 10 books later. This is my new favorite book. If you were to only read one parenting book, I would recommend this one. I just thought it was so great and just hit on everything we've talked about. I mean, it hit on everything we've talked about in the 10 plus episodes we've done of this podcast. I really loved it. What do you think?
Yeah, it covers a lot. I really, really liked it. I love that it's science-based, and
Very science-based.
Dan Siegel, he's not just a parenting guy, but he's, like a neuroscientist. I think he does all kinds of brain stuff.
Yeah.
And Payne Bryson is developmental psychologist and parenting expert. And so it's sort of this combination of like brain science and parenting all put together.
Yeah. And it's a new book. It's based on like kind of the latest research. They wrote another book called The Whole Brain Child and No Drama Discipline. Someone had recommended to me The Developing Mind from Dan Siegel a long time ago. So that was it was already sitting in my Audible. And when this book was over, I actually listened to this book twice because sometimes I can be a little distracted as I'm listening. And I got so much out of the chapters 4 and 5. I was like, I know there's more for me also in chapters 1, 2, and 3. So I went back and listened to those 3 chapters again. And then I moved on back to The Developing Mind, which I had started a long time ago, but it's the thickest book I've ever even tried to read or listen to. I think the audiobook is over 24 hours long.
Wow.
So it's a long book. And so I'm listening to that again too. But the point is that it's very science-based. These people have a deep understanding of developmental psychology and how children's brains work. And again, it's my favorite. So whatever bones Kara has to pick with it, we'll go through those too.
Yeah.
So kind of at the core, I don't know if you want to try and introduce it or if you want me to, just maybe talking about the 4 fundamentals of the yes brain.
Yeah, and we could even talk about like what is the yes brain?
Yeah.
Basically they're talking about, I don't know that they ever say polyvagal theory in the book. Maybe they do.
Yeah.
They mentioned Peter Levine, right? But they're talking about,
it's Stephen Porges' idea. Peter Levine writes
about it. Thank you.
Yeah.
They're talking about the states of our autonomic nervous system. They don't use dorsal vagal and ventral vagal and all that stuff. They talk about the green zone, which is the safe and connected. That one's ventral vagal. The red zone, which is when we get activated and we get into fight or flight. And then there's another zone called the blue zone. That's sort of the new one, where the blue zone is kind of a mix of both. There's like a lot of activation from the sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight energy, but there's also this like deactivation energy. Mm-hmm. And that's the dorsal vagal, where that goes into shutdown, freeze, and fawn kinds of states. Mm-hmm. And so they're talking about the green zone is when we're in that green zone, that's the yes brain. So they talk a little bit about the no brain at the beginning of the book, which is, being reactive and in that
and
red
shutting down and control and
yeah. So either reactivity or shutdown, red zone and blue zone, and that we need those states. Those are, survival mechanisms, and that we also want to be able to get back to the green zone. And that's where the yes brain is. And they talk about resilience, balance, insight, and empathy. There's like a big fat chapter on each one of those, going into how to help our kids develop skills in all those areas.
Good. Yeah, so I pulled up a graphic while you were talking. Sorry if it was distracting for anyone, but they talk about, the prefrontal cortex, what they call the upstairs brain, which is where planning and thinking and imagining and sympathy and even morality and all that exists. And then the kind of lizard brain, which they call the downstairs brain, with anger and the four fundamentals of the yes brain. That's these: empathy, resilience, balance, and insight. So do you want to just talk a little bit about each of those?
So balance was way back at the beginning of the book, and I'm not remembering it that well.
Yeah, we can go through their little bullets. This is the refrigerator sheet I'm kind of thumbing through, that you guys can see, talking about that red zone and green zone and blue zone. They also talk about the volcano in a way that that kids could a little bit more easily understand, and noticing what's taking us into the red zone or even to the blue zone. But yeah, here's the kind of bullets there around yes brain versus no brain. So we can just read a little bit about this. Yes brain is flexible and curious and resilient, willing to try new things, open to the world. It develops this internal compass, which we've been talking about in so many of the books we've read.
Yeah.
No brain is more reactive and fearful, focuses on external achievements, not internal intrinsic rewards. These are the kind of well-behaved, obedient kind of kids, and that's not what they're aiming for here with the yes brain work. So balance is first. You want to just talk about this, Kara?
Yeah, and I think they're really just describing this state of feeling calm and in control and in the green zone and able to find the green zone, and feeling like happy and stable a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But that's what we're wanting for our kids, right?
Yeah. One of our radical parenting colleagues in the radical honesty community recently wrote a lot about connection and separation, of like being there with your child in a way that your child knows that you're there with them. It's one of their like kind of mantras, is like, I'm here with you, like no matter what your kid is going through. That's kind of one of their mantras. But also just this healthy separation where when they get upset, you can be with their upset without also getting upset. When they're anxious, you can be there and you can totally empathize and sympathize with their anxiousness and not get anxious yourself. And they then learn how to have this observer role for themselves that acknowledges, look, I'm anxious, look, I'm upset,
and it's okay, and I can handle it. Yeah, and I really loved that discussion about being differentiated. And there's some way of like, if we get too involved in their emotions, it takes the focus off of their inner experience, and it's sort of like going into our fears and worries and stuff like that. So the more regulated we are and have this differentiation of like, I have my feelings, you have feelings, and
it is a balance. Yeah. So then the next three were resilience, insight, and empathy. So resilience still, I think, really does relate to balance. It's expanding that green zone, which you talked about. You wanted to talk about also expanding your tolerance for. I mean, in a way, that's what expanding your green zone is. It's getting nearer and nearer the red zone and not falling into it.
Yeah, I think that this is so much the work that we do in Radical Honesty is about expanding the green zone, where we go to those places that are intense and scary, and we're willing to just totally um, experience what's there, and we find out that it's not as scary as we thought usually, or that even if we're going into some like really deep grief or pain, that we can handle it and that we can go all the way through it and get to the other side of it. It's not the end of the world. We can just open and open and open, and our heart never breaks. We can just keep opening. And I know my green zone has expanded a lot in that way of like when it comes to, you know, conflict or discomfort or whatever, that it's not so scary, it's still uncomfortable. And so that's what we want for our kids, is that and I think this is one of the bones that I have to pick, actually, is like, if we're too afraid of the red zone, then that's a problem. I think that we can't expand our green zone if we're like terrified of ever going to the red zone.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be willing to go there, you know, in a way where we don't like completely lose control and go into like physical violence or things like that, but that we do have to be willing to follow it, both.
Yeah. I mean,
think.
I'd say
Yeah.
for your child, it's a little different. Like, I'm with you. I think like we have to be occasionally even okay with them going into that zone. It is developmentally appropriate for them to kick and hit and stuff. And it doesn't mean it's not a teaching lesson where, you know, opportunity, but it's not the end of the world. Most kids are going to do that.
Yeah, and learning this resilience thing, it reminds me of I just finished this online course that's all about, you know, self-regulation and then co-regulation with our children, and they talk about mobility, that we want mobility. That's what we want, is we want to be able to move between the states or the zones, and not get stuck anywhere, or not get like reactively off into the red zone and not be able to get ourselves back. So we want the resilience, I think, is mobility could be another way to talk about that, of like, it's okay if we go to the red zone, we know what to do, we can work our way through it.
Yeah. So I have a couple clips I'm going to try and play from the audiobook. We've never actually done this before. We've read off of the screen. We haven't played off of the audiobook, but I'm going to give it a shot for this one. And here's a clip I really like, relates to this idea of accepting these feelings, this idea of the red volcano. Maybe I'll pull up the image of the red volcano while we're listening to this. I'll go full screen. So this is all talking about resilience. This is, I think, Daniel Siegel.
There's nothing wrong with getting upset. That's an important point we want to communicate to kids. It's good and healthy for them to feel their feelings, even and maybe especially strong ones, and to express them. This is true of uncomfortable, bad feelings as well as for comfortable, good feelings. And the nervous system arousal that results from these strong feelings is perfectly fine as well to be aware of and even to express to others or oneself. In fact, it's really helpful to be open and not try to stifle internal responses, because that arousal is what alerts us that we're beginning to climb the mountain and move toward eruption. The increased heart rate, shallow breathing, and tight muscles are important warning signs we need to pay attention to, and they can help us if we are in a survival situation. So we want kids to know that it's good to experience emotions, to be open to whatever their body is experiencing. But we want to help them develop the insight to recognize when their sympathetic nervous system is increasing arousal and driving them up the red volcano. This recognition is what will provide the powerful pause between stimulus and response.
So that's what they're talking about. They're like, we honor these feelings, we honor all of it, we don't stifle it, but what we do introduce is this pause, where instead of going to the normal knee-jerk reaction, the normal kind of auto-programmed reaction, we pause, we reflect on these feelings, we really feel them, and then we introduce choices. And that's kind of our job as parents, is to introduce all those choices. Yes, you can kick the wall. Yes, you can run away. Here's some other choices. And then over time, not something that a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old is going to necessarily grasp, but over time they recognize, yeah, some of these choices work out better for them than others. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
the clip I wanted to play about this
Great.
topic, this resilience topic.
And he's also talking about the third big topic, which is insight, which is that the awareness of that awareness. I think is one of our biggest tools to be resilient, right? Is that the self-awareness of like, okay, I'm getting activated, and to help our children notice the sensations that are happening, and to, I guess the red volcano is one place I got a little stuck with the book. I don't know that he says this, or maybe I'm just worrying that more sort of mainstream conventional parenting thinkers will hear that and think, okay, my job is to stop before I get to the peak of the red volcano and like back it up. And I think what he's really trying to say is that, or at least this is what I believe, is that like you do actually have to go through it to get to the other side. There's no like stopping it in its tracks, right?
Mhm.
Like we have to complete the response. I don't know what like polyvagal theorist says that, but we can't pretend to be unactivated when we are unactivated. We
Mhm.
can, but that's not true green zone,
Yeah.
right? So like those choices are, I guess I think there's a danger of it becoming too much of an intellectual thing where it's like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm just going to stop and be rational here and not
Mhm.
be reactive. And
Mhm.
it's like, we have to be reactive in some way that's not going to hurt ourselves or anybody else to complete the response and get that activation out, whether it's movement or jumping up and down or singing or pushing on the wall as hard as you can, or with kids, we're not necessarily yelling, but it's okay with me if my daughter yells at me. I try not to yell at her, obviously. And that we want to have these choices available to where we're not trying to stop the activation or go up into our heads about it. We're like being fully in that energy and moving or singing or playing. One of the things I want to do another podcast on is going to be about therapeutic play, where it can be, pillow games where you're really like smushing each other, right? And you're getting that like physical, I guess my main complaint, now that I'm like talking this all out with you, is that I think there has to be a big physical part to the process, because it's our bodies that need to move through those
Mhm.
states to get over, that it's not necessarily going to be as rational as how it sounded to me in the book. And I don't know that that's what the authors really mean.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. But I think what they were talking about in terms of kind of pausing is less about interrupting or distracting ourselves from any of those feelings, but it's just like often we aren't aware of ourselves getting agitated and everything, and we do these things subconsciously that only heighten our agitation and
Right.
arousal, and we don't do any of the things that are like whatever polyvagal system or autonomic nervous system would need to calm ourselves down. Hand on heart, hand on stomach, any kind of pausing. We are just in it, and then we don't really realize that we're so agitated and triggered until the amygdala or the HPA axis has totally taken over.
Mm.
And so I think what he is saying is that, like, if you start noticing that tension in your stomach, or you start noticing that increased heart rate, or you start noticing shakiness or whatever, you can pause and notice those things in ways that honor them, let them be there, let you still feel agitated, but don't just kind of put it on this, what is that when you put a microphone next to a speaker or whatever? like a feedback loop.
Feedback. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really like the way you just said all that. It's like we're pausing in order to be able to bring in our awareness and our noticing so that we can really be with that, be in the experience as it's happening and not getting sort of like flooded.
Yeah. And I think these 4 things, I mean, the first chapter is just an overview of the yes brain. Second chapter is just about balance. The third chapter is just about resilience. The fourth chapter is about insight, and then the fifth chapter is about empathy. We're going to talk more about these last 2, but for me, everything just really did kind of bleed together. I had a little bit of trouble with the distinction, especially balance and resilience really overlapped. Resilience and insight really overlapped for me. Insight and empathy really overlapped for me. So I'm going to play another clip again from the book. I think this time is now Payne Bryson reading, and she's talking about kind of this overlap between insight and empathy. And one of the things I love about this is she's also talking about what our last episode was about. I don't know if people are watching this in order, but so let's just listen really quick.
When they watched movies, they would occasionally pause the film to ask questions like, why do you think Travis got sad when Old Yeller started acting so differently?
This actually isn't the clip I thought it was, but we're going to listen to this one anyway. This one's just more about empathy. So she's just talking about how, like in our children's book, where I have all these books that are aimed at empathy, I think Carrie even mentioned this, like you don't need children's books aimed at empathy. You can just ask, what do you think he's feeling? What do you think she's feeling? So this is some practices that parents were doing with a child that was kind of struggling with empathy skills, where instead of getting scared, oh my God, our son is a sociopath, they just start doing these practices.
What do you think he should do? What's the right thing here? Simply by drawing awareness to characters' emotions and motivations, they helped Devin move outside of himself and realize that the people on the pages and the screen had their own subjective interests and considerations that were quite apart from his own. From there.
And so like, here's an image where it says like, what we see is something like this kid pushing this kid down, but what is really being communicated, and this is almost comical, but I really like it. I need skill building when it comes to empathy. I saw something very much like this in my nephew. He just turned 16. His name's Tyler. I talked about him a few times on this podcast. I saw him at his birthday party once when he was like 6 or 5 or something, push another kid down. And I remember being so scared that he was like a sociopath or that something was wrong with him. I just got like tears in my eyes thinking about it. I mean, I love my nephew, and I wanted him to be reading these empathy books and building these skills, and that had gotten kind of interrupted and to some extent by my sister saying I kind of wore out my welcome a little bit with my co-parenting as a brother. And then I stopped reading him these empathy books, and then I see him do this, and I remember being so scared. And I wish this is how I had interpreted it. You know, I just need some skill building when it comes to empathy. And Tyler, my nephew, is just like the most conscientious, like sweet kid now. He's just so sweet. I mean, he's a young man. He's not even a kid. And this is normal. This is what kids do when they're kind of figuring everything out. So I'm going to keep going with Tina Payne Bryson.
It was easy enough to ask similar questions about the lives of real people. Ms. Azizi got upset more easily than usual during class today, huh? I wonder what might have happened to her this morning before school. In simple conversations during normal, everyday interactions, basic questions like, why do you think Ashley is feeling sad? How can we help? Build the scaffolding for an increased sense of mind sight, morality, and an awareness of the minds of others.
Good. So that's it for that clip. And that also hits on, sorry, who was the book that we read, the male author?
Alfie Kohn.
Yeah, Alfie Kohn. What she just said there just like really reminded me again of Alfie Kohn and what the kind of work that I think he recommends also. But here's the clip that I meant to play. Okay.
Integration made visible is kindness and compassion. The other decision Devin's parents made to help guide him toward being more empathic was to allow him to experience his own negative emotions. As you've heard us stress repeatedly throughout the book, the point is not to create a version of your child that you want to see develop, but to allow each individual child to develop into him or herself. Building an empathic brain is about giving your kids more skills, not turning them into who you want them to be. We've talked a good bit so far about the problems that result from overprotecting kids, which keeps them from learning the lessons and resilience that come with disappointment, frustration, and even defeat. Bubble wrapping kids also prevents the full development of empathy, which often emerges directly from having experienced negative emotions themselves. Each time Devin's parents allowed him to feel sad or frustrated or disappointed instead of immediately distracting him or rushing in to fix things, his potential for empathy grew since his own struggles opened up space within him to understand and identify with the pain of others. His parents sat with him and supported him in his pain, of course, but they didn't deny or distract him from his feelings, since they knew how important, instructive, and even healthy negative emotions can be.
Yeah, I just love that clip. I think that message is so important. I'm in the middle of a kind of a custody dispute with the mother of my son, and anything I say that kind of goes in this direction, she's just so scared of. She's so scared of me like neglecting our son or letting him touch a fire and burn his hand or something along those sorts of things. And just like my whole ideas around non-interference, are just like so scary to her, and she's used them in court and stuff against me, and I'm gonna keep doing it. I just know it doesn't help our kids to bubble wrap them. And again, like I've talked about my sister Emily, I think she's one of the best parents I've ever seen, and it's just so natural for parents, especially parents who are just so into parenting, to just want to protect their kids from everything and do everything for their kids and be so focused on their kids' needs and so immersed in providing for their kids. And it's not intuitive that harms our kids.
Yeah, it actually doesn't protect them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It goes back to the Batman podcast that you mentioned. It's like it robs them of their chance to learn get their own balance and learn their own thing. Like, did we talk about it on one of our shows? I can't remember where this came from, but there was this funny story about some play space where the director of the space wouldn't let parents in because he said the kids were fine. They would be climbing trees and doing all kinds of risky stuff, but they would know their own limits, and they might stretch their limits a little bit, but they wouldn't do anything crazy until the parents came. And when the parents came, that's when the kids would get hurt, because they would either be trying to disprove their parents, or they would be, distracted by their parents interrupting them in the middle of something and fall or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. Did we talk about that?
No, we didn't.
Show?
We talked about that.
I'll have to figure out where that came from, but it's like they really, like, a kid doesn't walk up to a fire and touch it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Guess what? They actually don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
They can actually feel that it's hot, and they might get close enough and feel, oh, that's really hot. Like, no kid is going to go up and stick their hand in a fire.
But the child who would be most likely is the child who has been like so far kept from a fire their whole life that they just don't, that they don't know about that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I want
like
my
maybe
child
a wood stove is different because it's not really hot until you touch it. But that's actually not true. It's really hot.
Yeah.
When you get close enough.
Yeah. And one of the important things too is like, I don't want my child to look at me as, we all on some level want to be just like a superhero to our kids, but I don't want my child to look at me as the source of his. I mean, at the beginning, I have to be, the 4 S's were like safety, soothing. I don't remember exactly what they were, but at some point, as soon as possible, I want my child to be his own source of like confidence and strength and knowledge, and just that he knows he can, or she, in my case, a he, can navigate the world and can be just like adept and adventurous and brave. And it's not because I'm there holding his hand, it's because he has so much capacity in his own chest to do that.
And I would say we are there and we are going to protect our kids, but we're not there doing it for them. So let's take like a big long set of stairs, and like a baby who's crawling and has never been around stairs before. You're not going to just be like 3 rooms away, like, okay, I guess whatever happens, happens. The baby might fall down the stairs, but you can see, you watch, I mean, and you find out what are they able to do. And you're right there maybe with a hand in case they fall without actually touching. And then, I mean, I would say maybe start at the bottom of the stairs. And then it's like I remember when my daughter was first starting to get up and down stairs before she could even walk. And it was like, I could be right there so that like nothing terrible was going to happen, but she was free to explore how could she actually, get up and down, and she could, and I could see, if I was actually paying attention, what she could and couldn't do, so that I could protect her and give her the maximum freedom to do what she was able to do.
Yeah.
Which is changing all the time, right? So it's hard to keep up with at first.
Yeah. When I helped my niece learn to ride a bike, I just like held the back of her neck and I jogged alongside her as she rode a bike. So no training wheels, no nothing. And it's such an easy way to like balance, if she's falling off balance, just holding her neck. And, I tend to want to let them go as much as possible. So I'd want to kind of like keep my hand off. And several times I loved it. She would just grab my hand and like put it right on the back of her neck so that I could grab her again. And I love that it's like she's asking for it. If she wants that guidance and that balance that I can provide, then I want to provide it. But anytime where she's just adventuring and just trying it herself, I want to give her, sometimes I don't even want her to know that I'm there about to catch her,
Yeah.
And sometimes it's helpful for them to know that you're there about to catch them. So,
and it's like, we're not going to go bring our kid to like a busy road to teach them how to ride a bike.
Right.
But we are going to like let them fall down and skin their knee if an accident happens, So there's this juggling, I feel like.
And a lot of the time, and one of the things they get into in this book, and I'm going to play another clip about it, a lot of the times when parents are unwilling to do that, it's because they haven't dealt with their own stuff. They can't handle the negative feelings that they have, and they can't handle their child feeling negative feelings that put a mirror up to some of their feelings that aren't integrated and resolved in their own heart. So I'm going to play, this is actually from chapter 4, but I think it's like a good conclusion of the book altogether. So I think this is Dan Siegel.
Hence is really clear on the answer. Absolutely not.
Sorry. So he's just saying, if you were parented by a kind of dysfunctional parent, are you doomed to be the same kind of dysfunctional parent yourself? And he says, no, you're not doomed to be it. Here goes.
Yes, the way we were parented obviously influences the way we view the world and how we come to parent our children. But what's even more important than the specifics of what happened to us is how we've reflected on and made sense of our own childhood experiences. When we gain clear insight into our memories and how the past has influenced us in the present, we become free to construct a new future for ourselves and for how we parent our children. The research is clear. If we make sense of our lives, we free ourselves from the prison of the past and gain insight that helps us create the present and future we desire.
So one of the things that Kara and I have done a lot with Radical Honesty workshops, I think it only really happens in the 8-day workshops, but at the end of the 7 and 8-day workshops, people kind of tell their life story. And Dan Siegel in this book, in the Yes Brain, talks about how people who haven't integrated, some of the trauma from their past, really struggle to do that. They can't really tell their life story in a cohesive way. They get kind of like distracted going down kind of rabbit holes. They have a lot of cloudiness. So he talks about that. And he also talks about what he calls, and this might be an actual term, it might not just be something he calls post-traumatic growth, where a lot of us are familiar with kind of post-traumatic stress disorder and unresolved traumas, where when something then triggers some kind of unresolved, trauma from our past, our brain will just do anything to avoid that happening again. Our brain will just really react and go straight to our lizard brain, just saying like, it's how it's built. It's like we get bit by a snake, and the rest of our lives, our brain is just like, no, you see one of those snakes and you freak out. You stomp on it, you run, whatever fight or flight your amygdala decides is right for you. But most of our life isn't like that, and in Radical Honesty, we learn how we spend so much of our life avoiding a metaphorical snake bite, and the pain we cause ourselves is 1,000-fold worse than the snake bite would be. And that doesn't mean you necessarily let yourself get bit by the snake either, but we don't realize how we're kind of just driven by that. And so he talks about how with your kid, you can, as they're nearing that volcano and something has happened, you can like watch them have this post-traumatic growth. And he says it's just like very distinct from when you just have unresolved trauma and you're just like in shock from some experience, where you've paused and you've reflected on this thing that's just happened. You acknowledge these feelings. You maybe even get to a point where you can focus on choices. And yeah, he refers to that as post-traumatic growth. So it is an opportunity for us to, one of the things that I've been watching, I want my child to learn how to swim. And one of my exes did the like infant thing where like even at 6 months, your kid can learn to turn over onto his back or her back and float and be able to breathe. And and several like teachers who teach children swimming and even infant swimming, there's a debate back and forth, because they're like, if the kid is crying or if the kid is all coughing or choking on water, it's a horrible thing. They're going to hate the water or whatever. But some of the other instructors have said, no, we know the difference. We know when they are, really triggered, and when they're just a little uncomfortable, because they're supposed to be, because it's a new situation and there's still like a learning opportunity. We know the difference between that and when it's just a traumatic experience for our kid, that they're not in a learning space anymore.
Mm.
So I've been really watching a lot of videos and excited about that. Drowning is actually like the #1 cause of death for kids like under 4 or something. And it's just so
Super
mad.
scary.
Yeah, and it's crazy that more kids don't learn that skill, and it's because it's partly because we're just so afraid of learning that skill. Involves a couple times where you aspirate water and cry and cough. It involves being a little scared sometimes. I don't know. I'm still not prepared to do it, certainly on my own, but it really plays into that. So the point is that one of the steps to being the parents we want to be is looking at these areas where you're watching your kid be uncomfortable with something and you want to intervene, and then you just like reflect, is this something from me, is this holding a mirror up to something that I'm not ready or able to accept, or am I really just trying to help my child, or is there anything I'm trying to avoid? It's such a great growing opportunity for us.
Like nothing else, right? Yeah, that last little part of the clip that you played, it reminded me so much of the life planning work that we do in Radical Honesty, where it's like, once we complete our sort of resolve our past trauma, then we have all this kind of openness and creativity and energy to like be creative in our lives instead of reactive in our lives. And that's what we want for our kids, right? And it's like, I see with my daughter how, traumatic things can happen. For her, it would be very, very minor traumas so far. And we can handle it right then and there. And it doesn't then have to be in her backpack until she's 30 and she's in therapy or whatever. Something as simple as like, the last time she went to the doctor's office and got shots was super traumatic for her. She didn't want to do it. I like stopped the nurses at one point and was like, stop, she's not ready. You know, I don't want to do it this way. And we talked about it so many times after that, just describing what happened and just describing it. And then she plays all the time about with giving shots with her little doctor tools and stuff to her stuffed animals, to me, to herself, and will play and pretend that it really hurts and stuff like that. And so what I imagine we're doing is like working through that trauma,
Totally.
so it's
Totally.
not sticking around.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm not going to like give her a sticker if she doesn't cry or something. She gets a shot. It's going to be like, yeah, it hurts. And you don't want a needle going in your skin. So, yeah, all that empathy for her. And then she gets to build that process of doing that too, you know, of it's okay to go back and revisit something that was uncomfortable and revisit it a few times probably and integrate it. And there's some, and I'm not in control of that and she's not in control of that, but there's some integration that's happening along the way.
It's great. I'm listening to you. I'm just feeling like kind of jealous and sad that I don't get to do that with my son. I know it'll come, but I only right now mostly get like 15 minutes a day with him to like read him books, and he's only a little over 9 months, so his integration isn't like Elsie Jane's. But today, for the first time, and again, most of the stuff I just have to guess at because I get so little time with him, but he was kind of crawling up on the table, and this is a little off topic from the S brain, but he was crawling up at the table and was looking at a plant that's on the table, and he's just going like this, you know, just like shaking his head. And you can't be sure, but I'm 99% sure that like his mom has told him, you know, like he's very rough, you know, he's like, he just smashes things with his hands, and he's not a delicate, gingerly child. So I'm sure she has said, you know, like, we don't touch this plant. And so he crawls up and he looks at it, and he just like he knows that he's not
He's
supposed
like telling himself,
yeah,
touch
he's telling
it,
himself,
don't touch it.
no, this is the rule with this thing, is I'm not supposed to touch it. And then he did the same thing with the iPad, because most of the time while I'm talking to him, his mom or his sister, whoever's facilitating me reading a book to him, just tells him, no, don't touch that iPad, because he turns it off and hangs up on dad and whatever. And so he does the same thing sometimes. He looks at the iPad and he says no, and it took me a while to get it, but I think that's what it is. And I just hope there's so few of those no's in his life, you know, because honestly, even with the iPad, I want him to turn it off. Like, I want him to just do whatever the heck he wants to do. And I get that you can't always do that, but I'm going to try and set up my house like the Montessori schools and like the other places. Brad's son, I guess, does a lot of work on safe space and creative places and tinkering places, making those spaces work. He didn't want to do the podcast, but I'm just going to learn all I can about that so I can just set up my space, because eventually it'll be good for him to hear no and to understand that there are some areas where he can just go hit everything with his hands and some areas where he can't. But I want him to feel so free to follow his folly. I want him to feel so free. You know, his heart is so pure. He's not trying to hurt anyone or break anything, you know, like, and when he's just trying to like experience the world, I want him to experience the world and not to be looking for all these things telling him not to, or what's the appropriate way and what's the inappropriate way, until he can really grok that. I want him to just have yeses in his brain.
Yeah, they need just like hours of that every day, you know, of like free exploration. And that actually reminds me of the very ending of the book, which was one of my favorite parts, where Dan Siegel is talking about some educational stuff. I hope I'm remembering this correctly, but he talks about this sort of cultural phenomenon we have of like kids getting into this like really intense educational grind of like taking a million AP classes and like not getting enough sleep because they're like writing papers or whatever. And I see this with I teach violin lessons, and I would say every single one of my students who's in high school, my heart is breaking for them because there is no balance in their life. It's like they're doing probably 10, 12, 14 hours of school every day. And of course, the people who are playing violin well into high school are probably some of the most kind of high achievers. So, he talks about that play is what develops the brain, and that doing traditional school stuff and building up your resume of all these like pointless things to get into some like highfalutin college or whatever, that's not actually building a resilient, insightful, empathetic brain. It's not actually building like the humans that we want in the world.
Yeah. And like truly free play is part of the goal. They talk about that being like built into our lizard brains, and that it's not just that it encourages cooperation and whatever is kind of obvious with play, but that it is like essential to developing imagination and the mind's to mental development. Just free unstructured playtime is really important.
Yeah. Which it's not even like, that's not like doing puzzles or coloring in coloring books or any of that stuff. It's like taking the weirdest stuff and doing the weirdest stuff with it. And like,
Totally.
that's what kids are great at, I mean, I'm biased because my daughter's in that age right now of like real imaginary play. Like she can get excited about regular toys too, but like I bought a vegetable steamer basket the other day and she was like in love with that thing for hours. Like the vegetable steamer basket, that's what she wanted to play with,
Yeah. So this is something they reference in the book, but it came from an earlier work he did with David Rock, that is like, these 7 things. So like good amount of sleep, and they actually give you the number of hours they recommend for kids at each age. I don't remember what time in is, but it's probably just the opposite of downtime. Connecting time, physical time, focus time, which could even be like a puzzle or something like you're saying, but then just total free play time is all necessary for a healthy mind.
Yeah.
So thank you again, Kara, and for everybody who's listening. This is my favorite book we've read so far, and I think you picked our next book. Have you decided?
Yes, it's called Listen by Patty Wipfler, who is the founder of Hand in Hand Parenting.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to it. Anything to say before we let everybody go this week?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for joining us for another episode of the Radical Parenting Podcast. Please do check out the book, The Yes Brain. I think it just has so much promise for our kids and for us as parents. So I hope you guys all get a chance to read it, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.